Welcome to this webinar on evolving LGBTQ plus landscape in the US and its implications for corporate India. We're going to wait a couple of more minutes for more people to join in. Meanwhile, if you want to turn on your cameras, perhaps use the chat to tell us a little hi, where you're joining from. That'll be nice to get to know you. And we should be starting in a while. Wonderful. I can see a lot of people typing in their hellos and hi's. If you want to tell us where you're joining in from, there you go. Which organization or perhaps which country or state, that'll be nice. Wonderful. We have a lot of people joining from India, and then we have a few from the Netherlands. If you want to take some time to turn on your cameras and be a bit more present with us, that'll be great as well. It's always good to see smiling faces. Thank you again for joining us. There's a few people who are joining from London as well, and from the UK. This is perfect. All right, so I guess people have already started to join in. So without further ado, we have a lot of things to cover out here. I'm going to formally welcome you again. My name is Sonali. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm a senior program manager DEI at Red Circle. I welcome you all to this very important webinar on evolving LGBTQ plus landscape in the US and its implications for corporate India. How do we adapt and navigate this change? To moderate this conversation, I would like to call up on the virtual stage Ramkrishna Sinha, co-founder of Pride Circle and Rainbow Bazaar, to take this conversation forward. Ram, the stage is all yours.
Hi, thanks a lot, Sonali. Hi, everyone. Good day from wherever you're joining. This is such an important conversation. So let's dive into it with a very quick round of introduction from our brilliant panelists today. We have Fabrice joining us from the US. Hi, Fabrice. Do you want to quickly say something?
Hi, well, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be with my Indian friend. Hopefully, that's going to cheer me up, as the context in the US, as we are going to discuss, is a bit depressing. So yeah, I look forward to our conversation.
Thanks, Fabrice. We have Zainab.
Hey, good evening, all of you all, and thank you for joining in with whatever numbers you've come in. I think I'm just going to repeat one line throughout the evening, and that is, we will overcome. We've dealt with something worst all through our lives. This one president and everything that's happening with him, we are strong enough to take him head on, and we will do that. I'm Zainab. I am a transgender woman. I also work on strategic litigation. I'm a social entrepreneur. And in my daytime job, I'm also a DEI advocate. Happy to be part of this panel.
Thanks, Zainab. Hi, Zoya.
Hi, I'm Zoya. My pronouns are they, them. I lead D&I and employer branding at Godrej Properties. Thank you, Ram, and good morning, good evening, good afternoon from wherever you folks are joining in. Very glad to see huge numbers. Looking forward to having this great discussion. And I'll second Zainab, your whatever is happening is a blip in the many great things that have happened. And till we have the energy and the hearts, we'll keep pushing things forward in the right direction. Yeah.
So most people would obviously be familiar with what all is unfolding, but let's take it from official sources in some sense, I would say. So I will invite Fabrice for here to share with us briefly on the executive order and the various other actions the Trump administration and the president himself have taken up, which impacts the LGBTQ plus community in the US. So what has basically happened, because there's a lot of noise on social media. So just to get a very quick summary on what are the key aspects of the executive order that directly impacts the community, if you can share, Fabrice.
Yeah, well, it has only been 3 weeks, and so the dust hasn't settled on a lot of the policies or orientations of the current administration, right? We have seen a few executive orders, actually not that many, and then we have seen the reaction of corporations or the reaction of federal agencies, which sometimes is not completely linked to what the administration has asked. As an example, and I'm sure we are going to discuss this on this panel. Um, you know, the there is on DI there is really one executive order that has asked federal agencies to roll back all DI initiatives. But interestingly enough, some agencies, some universities have gone beyond the request of the government because they're like, okay, well, they feel the time of DI is over, and it's a natural reaction, right? They preemptively dismantled things that were important to us, right? And the second, so there is that executive order on DI in federal agencies, which had a bit of a chilling effect, on universities, on corporations. But then President Trump has also asked the Department of Justice to investigate private companies, and we don't really know on their DEI initiative for what he kind of described as reverse discrimination against white people. But again, I think the goal was to send a message to corporation much more than there is really going to be lawsuits, So as an example, yesterday we read in the news that Goldman Sachs had dismantled a very important board diversity initiative that they created 3 years ago. 3 years ago, they were very proud to say, we are not going to take any company that doesn't have a woman on their board to IPO. I mean, the bar is pretty low. As a Frenchman, I can tell you having one woman on your board, that's not a very high bar, right? Well, they said yesterday, we're not doing that anymore. Meaning if you have an all-male board, you can go to IPO, we'll come with you, we'll remove that mandate. I'm not really sure that, there was any real legal risk for Goldman Sachs. In a way, they're sending a message to the administration, don't look our way, we're not doing anything you dislike. So I'll put DI aside once again to say, what we have to remember is that, of course, there is the attack on DI, but our community is suffering from other attacks, right? There is one very frontal attack against trans people. There is an understanding for a very long time in the United States that we recognize gender identity. Well, Trump has said there is no more gender identity, right? And that has very concrete consequences for trans people, right? So as an example, it has consequences on their ability to travel with passports that were issued to them with an X marker, right? That's finished, right? They are not able to renew their passport. If they have brought their passport for renewal, they are in a bind. And then the other thing is that the discourse is extremely antagonistic, and that has had consequences. As an example, in Congress this week, we have a congresswoman that introduced the only trans congresswoman in the House by saying, I yield the floor to the gentleman from Delaware, right? And what really she meant is, that she doesn't recognize gender identity. And that's extremely problematic for trans people, right? And so, it's important to see that as being separate from the DEI agenda, which is, the administration is attacking trans people first because it's like a flock of sheep, right? They are taking the one at the edges that are the easiest one to take out. And so I would differentiate that a little bit from the attack on DEI. And then the third aspect is the foreign policy of the United States. And maybe that's something that the community is not paying huge attention to because we are very focused on trans issues and the attack on DEI. But the foreign policy shift, which is the United States, is basically saying we do not really care about the well-being of people abroad. How is any of this making America better or America stronger? That has actually has a very negative effect on LGBT people globally because we were very reliant, our movement was very reliant on aid from the United States, whether it was aid from USAID, aid from the State Department, and aid also from international organizations that might be pulling away from LGBT issue again in a preemptive manner. So I would say, there are three-pronged attack. One is DI, one is trans, and one is the foreign policy of the United States. And I love, what I'll conclude on that. I love what Zenad said, right? Which is as much as it's a very unpleasant moment, it's a bit of a wake-up call to our community, and we have to develop a strategy to make sure that we palliate, to those changes in America. In many ways, we were too dependent on the Democrats and the Democrats winning, and that's a good wake-up call for our community.
Thank you, Fabrice, for like very clearly laying out the three different challenges that we're facing right now. Zainab, as a trans person, first, like obviously, none of these EOs have any significance in India, right? No legal aspect as such. But what were your first thoughts when you heard about this, when you started this and see this unfold? And what impact you feel that this legislation and executive action have on individuals from the trans and queer community who are not directly based in the US or not directly legally impacted, but I would say psychologically, because that news transfers and that culture transfers and anti-DI backlash transfers across the world. We're already seeing a lot of that in social media. What are your thoughts on that?
Ram, thank you for that question. When I first heard about this, this was it was a sense of deja vu, and I'll tell you exactly why it is. Several months ago, we were all in court on the marriage equality case. I was one of the petitioners, and everything that has been mentioned in the court orders, what's happening from a legislative policy front, what's happening in terms of influencing the foreign policy, aid decisions, etc., is exactly what was spoken in the Indian courtroom by the Solicitor General and those that were represented by the government as well as the other parties involved. They said the same thing. Trans people do not know what they are doing. They are occupying other spaces. LGBT people, we're okay with decriminalizing them, but nothing more than that in terms of the right spectrum. And I think it was some kind of and all of this language came in. We were called urban elitists. We call all sorts of names. And exactly the same logic that we are mentally sick, deranged people. This was what was said in the court, and I would rather be more worried about what is being said and transpired in Indian courts rather than what is happening in the US. But this is exactly what happened several months ago. And look at it from a sense of deja vu. Like, it's both frustration for me because we've seen this cycle happen many times, progress followed by backlash. 2009, we had the Delhi High Court judgment. Then the stop on that, the backlash, people said, oh, if you decriminalize homosexuality, they will have sex on the street and the society will crumble, etc. It's been like so many years after we've done it. No society has crumbled. No one has had sex on the street except for maybe the cisgendered folks having it. So I'm saying, and the fact is that most of the developed countries, they still debate whether trans or genderqueer people actually deserve basic rights. It's both, for me personally, exhausting and telling. So for me, it's not about the policies, but like, I'm going to tell you, and thanks, Fabrice, for bringing it up. I'm telling this as a trans woman. So when you're looking at the impact of what Fabrice said from a legal and administrative barrier, for me, laws that restrict gender affirming care or IDs are actually reflecting that gender identity can make everyday life an obstacle. Imagine coming up with X passports and being stalled at border control. Or when we have security patting you down or doing a security check and not putting in any measures around sensitization. And where the laws are already regressive, people will, like trans people and non-binary folks, will actually struggle with job application, bank accounts, or even travel. let me tell you, as a trans woman, traveling and access to sanitation are our worst nightmares, because gender markers change, people don't change, they still keep on questioning us. um, the economic fallout of it. So when people remove workplace protection, it increases the unemployment and financial instability. I think I'm going to quote a 2023 study from the Williams Institute that says that 48% of trans adults in the US experience some form of workplace discrimination. In India, in a paper that I also happened to contribute towards, there was a study done by UNDP, which said that 92% of trans people are actually excluded from formal employment. And now, when the governments are actually rolling back rights, it's actually emboldening anti-LGBT rhetoric and violence. And mind you, for those who think this is only an LGBT issue, we are okay. It has major implications on gender, on race, on ability, and that discussions will have implications. So if you actually look at hate crimes, the FBI had reported in 2022 that there's a 32% of rise in anti-LGBTQ hate crimes in the US. In India, we also see a similar trend of at least rising and reporting cases of transphobic violence in recent years, especially post-pandemic. So for me, these were some of the main things that actually scare me, because if you see social media today, you see people, quoting what's happening in the US. They say, "Are US has changed it? Why are we left to deal with people like this? Remove all of this LGBT stuff." The West has started declining here, because earlier it was said that homosexuality, trans issues, rights was all a Western import. Now the West has rejected it. So why should the East be held, responsible for holding the baby and the bath water? We have our own stuff. Let us get this is the rhetoric that a common man, woman, anyone on social media is using today. And I won't be surprised to see how it has an implication on societal structures, etc., and workplace conversations in the near future.
True. And unfortunately, all these statistics you mentioned are just about to get worse, at least in the current set of things. Uh, Thanks, Zainab, for that. Zoya, gender is binary. That is the first declaration, first day of his presidency. That's what Trump came up with, and is like very clear about non-existence of the concept of gender identity. It's purely biological. It's God-given, and there's absolute deliberate erasure of trans non-binary identities from policies, from government documents. How does this make you feel as a non-binary individual?
Um, Ram, I'll put it this way: when Trump's inauguration thing happened, it was basically night for us. I got up in the morning reading the news, and he says there are only two tenders, and we, identify this as the thing. That and the executive order wasn't yet signed. It was the thing that I read. I went through the grief, the stages of grief, right? I was like, yeah, denial, and then all of these pieces. Uh, but when I wear the lens of a DEI person in corporate, and I take a, like a seat back, and I really see how things have happened, then you come to know that we were really progressing towards this. It's not like we did not expect Trump to be eccentric on his first day, right? We have seen it, and we should be prepared for things much more in advance. What I will try to say is, um, how do I put it to you? That day, it was not just Trump speaking, right? There were two people speaking. If you have that much power to create DOGE for yourself, then there is going to be another voice on that platform. And I think a lot that was said that day was Elon Musk speaking as well, in a lot of things that were coming through. I actually have noted down, and I will read it out to you. A timeline of things when you see how DEI was getting its backlash before even Trump came to power, and also Elon's personal issues with his trans daughter and how that plays out as a leader, and then affects the spaces that he can affect, right, or has power on. So in June of 2020, Musk had tweeted on, pronouns suck, and that was at the same time when his trans daughter had gone in private sectors to tell their aunt, that, I'm someone who identifies as this. Flowing through that, in April of 2022, you saw Vivian actually coming out as a trans person, coming to court, saying that I want to change my name, I want to go to the transition. In this midst, you will see Trump going on a podcast speaking, and then being asked about it, and then they saying that as a parent, I really didn't have much control, but uh, and it was kind of a little problematic for me. And he did mention this in the same time you're seeing Vivian also say that my father didn't really have a role to play. He was actually when you're seeing this outplay, you realize that this is a person who is a troubled father at the moment. He's not able to accept the reality with their own thing, and what is in his control is the environmental. That's the corporate space, because he's one of the biggest business leaders. He's the richest man in the world. He owns Tesla, bought over Twitter, formerly Twitter, now X. Has a lot of control over how communication flows as well. And then how do you really put this impact, right? That's why his tweet on Walmart, then you tweet it on DIE is has to that. You will see this flow out in a very clear picture when you really take a step back. At the same time, I would also like to say that DEI, even in the West, started off in a very problematic manner, right? If you realize, it has been there, but it really shoot off after 2020 during COVID. And the whole BLM movement really picked up. And then organizations at that time had to pander to the trend at that point of time, and hence they kind of did whatever they did. They increased their hiring, they did this. Now again, if you realize, they're just pandering to the current audience, and the trend that they feel is the air that is going in that direction. And I think it's important for organizations to realize, where do they really stand on these values, if they really put them up on their walls or whatever, in that sense. And hence, for me, initially I was a little upset, but when I went back, I said that, okay, this is a much larger picture, and we have a much bigger role to play in it. And I think how we can do it is in our own organizations, in our own environments. Even if I'm not an Elon Musk, I can control my spaces. Like Steve Jobs said, once you realize that the world is a place where if you press one button, something else comes out, and you have the power to control this, it's all in your control. So yeah, that's how I would look at it.
Yeah, it's very important to recognize that personal bias and personal issue that has been a cause of a lot of this. And Fabrice, coming to you, sometimes obviously it's very laughable that when Trump blames a helicopter crash to DEI, which has nothing to do with it. But then also there are anti-DEI EOs, and then there are companies who are publicly pulling out, like Walmart, Google pulled out from Pride calendars, and a bunch of other stuff. And there's a series of companies that have either said they're like not spending on Pride marches, or cutting down DI programs, or revamping them, or keeping it internal. Various other forms of, in a sense, pullback from corporate America is what we're seeing. How do you see this trend to be, and what do you see this becoming? Like, do you see, is it a time where corporate America is actually going to shut down DEI for good, or is this just like political climate, and hence they're rebranding, reassessing how to go ahead with it? Is the business case for DEI still working for the communities it was supposed to serve for?
Yeah. And, I love the fact that Zoya talks about the Black Lives Matter movement, because, if we are a little bit blunt, that's really what Trump and Elon Musk are after, is black people, right? They are basically not super happy. They feel black people have had enough equality, right? And in a way, LGBT people are a little bit bystanders in that fight, right? I mean, really, really make America great again is make white America in control again, right? That's really what they're after. So, it's interesting, because for LGBT people, we have put a lot of our fight in the hands of DI, hoping that companies, as they grapple with racial discrimination, would also grapple with LGBT discrimination. And we realize that maybe we should have diversified a little bit the way we are trying to achieve equality. Because to me, what is really important is to come back to the fact, right? Which is LGBT people, until very recently, were extremely marginalized in society. And it's not a surprise that therefore we have a tiny portion of the economic pie, right? I mean, you know, if you ask Dalit people, or if you ask Roma people in Europe, or Batwa people in Congo, if you live at the margin of society, of course you have very few economic opportunities. Of course you're getting a tiny segment of the economy, right? And so, you know, the facts have not really changed. We still live at the margin of the economy. And I know that because, you know, Zainab was talking about the Williams Institute. The Williams Institute has done a bunch of research that show that LGBT people are overrepresented among the 40% poorest. And I, you know, I have I lead a small nonprofit that is focused on board representation. And I know that we only have 0.9% of the board seats in Fortune 500. There are only 3 CEOs out of 500 that self-identify as LGBT in Fortune 500. You know, there is a bunch of evidence that we live at the margin of the economy. So the problem has not changed. The issue is that the majority is now telling us you've had enough, you know. But the problem is that it's not really up to them to decide when we have had enough, right? You know, it's up to the facts, you know. Are we having a fair share of the economy, or are we still living at the margin of the economy? I would argue we are still living at the margin of the economy. A long way has to go. Now, you know, that's not really a response to your question on whether companies are going to dismantle all of their effort for LGBT inclusion. But what I mean by that is that whatever the administration does, the facts have not changed. And therefore, companies are still going to grapple with the fact that LGBT people as consumers, LGBT people as employees, LGBT people as investors are still going to be somewhat frustrated that they are getting the short end of the stick. And companies are going to have to respond to that. So what I suspect is that there is going to be a lot of difference among companies in the way they react, and also a lot of difference depending on the geography you're talking about. Meaning that in the United States, they might scale down completely what they do, but then in Europe or in India, they might continue, you know, they might continue because they will feel that pressure from consumer, investors, and employees. And then the other aspect is that there's also going to be sectors that are going to be completely immune to the DEI dismantling. You know, as an example, I know that beauty and fashion is very adamant about acquiring Gen Z consumers, and they know that Gen Z consumers want to see non-binary representation in advertising. They know that Gen Z consumers want to know that companies are being sustainable and are contributing to a better world. So I suspect that you are going to see manufacturing completely pulling away, and you know, fashion and beauty keeping the course. As I mentioned at the beginning of the discussion, 3 weeks in, it's a little early to know exactly what's going to happen. There's a lot of posturing going on. What I suspect is that little by little we are going to come back to some level of inclusion efforts, because the problem has not changed, which is LGBT people are really, you know, getting only a tiny little slice of the economy. That's not fair. That's not working for us. And so, you know, but I suspect that in the end, we will come back to some level of inclusion.
Thanks, Fabrice. Yeah, I mean, it's just been 3 weeks, and every day is a new day with Trump. So you never know what comes next. So it's going to take a while for us to even understand and then figure out a way to work around this. And we really hope that all this quick pullbacks have been knee-jerk reactions, and internally they continue to do the work on inclusion. We briefly touched about the impact of US aid funding. Zainab, do you want to talk about that? How does that impact countries like India and others who were supported by USAID fund from an LGBT inclusion perspective and the work for this community?
Sure. But I just wanted to add something to what Fabrice just said, and you know, building on that conversation. The 2 points of view, and one is a little controversial stand of what I may want to say, but it's in a safe space, and I just wanted to make sure about saying what I wanted to say. Totally agree with Fabrice that everyone is posturing at this point of time. The full impact of what may be planned or may be coming will be seen in the next few months. I had a very interesting chat with a colleague who also works in one of the US departments. And yes, the situation on the ground is bad. People are scared, everything, civil society, there's pushback, etc. But she also did mention to me that there are certain states that are pushing back and, trying to control the impact of it. We will see the full scheme of this unraveling of various negative actions happening over the next few months, probably a year or so, till we see a plateauing down. And the rhetoric, as you said, people are going to somehow pull their lives back to normal at some point of time, and there will be other agendas after they are 90, 180, 360 days of being in office. I'm sure there will be other pressing concerns that America would have, rather than bothering about people's ex-passport or whatever. So that is something that we need to weather out at this point of time. The second slightly controversial point of view that I have is that for a very long period of time, we've kind of assimilated what US MNCs has given us in terms of information download, aspirational targets, numbers, etc. I think it's high time the East evolves its own model of working on DNA. And I think that is something that Shrikant has put in the question. There is, without looking at left or right, I think and having worked in a French multinational, an American multinational, and I feel that the pressure to conform to numbers, to diversity numbers, to number of trainings, etc., all came in with a lot of these American MNCs pushing. I remember a consulting group saying that we have 2 lakh allies. I don't know what's going to happen of that, because that group for some reason has put out a statement that they are toning down their business. Is it 2 lakh allies? I mean, most of us on the call will actually know, but I don't want to name and shame any company on this call, but I think we need to give up that model and make it business as usual. I was talking to a colleague of mine from KPMG, and I was asking her before this call, what is it? She said, by the time, if you're truly invested in the DNI cause, it's already business as usual. There is no specific. Of course, you can decide what level of participation from visible events are. So this time, Pride might actually look different. And for a change, it's up to us to reclaim what that lost space is going to look like. But I just wanted to say that it's high time we give up. And I'll tell you the fallacy of why I'm saying this. When George Floyd was murdered in America, and we had this entire thing about Black Lives Matter that came up, Indian celebrities, Bollywood stars, everyone took a knee and started putting out these hashtag black. They were worried about what happened to George Floyd and the Black community in the States, but they were not really worried about what was happening in Una with the Dalit floggings or the communal rights of people dying in India. So they choose to, ignored the white elephant in the room, but wanted to ape what was happening in the West. So I think once we start evolving our own sense of what it means to be culture inclusive, we will have a better response to it. Now, coming to this very interesting topic on USAID, I worked with USAID from 2006 until a very long period of time. So when one talks about USAID, one needs to look at there are multiple funds and programs that they have. So there is, of course, the United States Agency for International Development. There is the Center for Disease Control. Then there is the US Gov funds, etc., so on and so forth. Now, you've all heard about this order which President Trump made on the 20th of January, which says we are reevaluating and realigning the foreign aid policy which has led to a 90-day suspension of UN foreign assistance to developing countries, including India. So whatever we think in terms of our great relationship, there is this pause in terms of development funding. And this pause was basically intended to align how they wanted. I have a couple of friends who have worked on very senior level positions in USA. So while it doesn't really specifically target LGBTIQ programs, the broad context in which it has worked, especially from the HIV lens, has actually resulted in, if not thousands, hundreds of people across India who was working through USAID supported programs funded by international NGOs, which have actually come to a halt. Most of it to do with health, climate, um, entrepreneurship, etc., so on and so forth. That is a major thing that is problematic. The second thing what I wanted to also mention is that while USAID has been an international organization and has played some role, I'm not going to say a significant or a non-significant role. I will have said there is some role that they have played in funding some HIV and some LGBTQ empowerment fund. The impact is not really beyond that at this point of time. So largely it has supported community health programs. Many Indian corporates follow, as I said earlier, follow that Western model of MNC's policies on DEI. And people like many groups, Google, Accenture, had adopted this inclusion policies based on the global framework. So if there is a budget shrink in the US, a similar repercussion may be seen, but it doesn't necessarily mean. And I'm going to ask everyone on this call a very, very basic question. When was the time you actually looked back at your books and you had adequate DEI budgets for LGBTQ people or or DEI budgets in general? I think for the most point of time, like I worked in a consulting firm, which was a story of two dichotomies. One was the poor cousin and one was the super rich cousin. So the super rich cousin had a super budget and the poor cousin had, let's say, a non-existent budget. So I'm the only organization which I've worked, which was cash rich, was the French multinational organization. But because it was in the alcobev sector, I mean, the alcobev sector also grew in double digits when there was COVID. So they already had a lot of money to put in for DNI initiatives. So I want to ask you a very simple question. Yes, there might have an implication of how we participate in pride marches and job fairs, etc. But the talent pipeline will continue to be you're not giving a job to someone because someone is an LGBT person only, right? You're not giving a job to someone because someone is a woman only. You're giving them because there is meritocracy and there is a need for aspirational targets. So I just wanted to call this out, that the impact of what USAID and other government or agencies of the US is doing, it has an impact, but I think here's an opportunity for us to double up what we are doing. If you've seen, I came across two things which I wanted to call out again. The right-wing narrative is seeping across and crossing all borders. So whatever is happening in the US in terms of anti-LGBT rhetoric, which is amplified by the White House, gets picked up by conservative groups in India who earlier claimed that this was a Western agenda. So now all the more they're saying even the West has rejected it, so it's not part of the Indian culture at all. You see hate messages and misinformation on WhatsApp, Twitter, Instagram. And if you see the anti-rhetoric, this thing, it has gone by several 100% times in the last 2 years. So if you're thinking that this is going to stop or affect the way you do DEI, let me tell you, DEI was never over-resourced or adequately resourced in India. Here is a chance for us to actually build a narrative and continue doing what we are doing with the resources that we have.
Thank you, Zainab. I'll pull you in, Zoya, from an Indian company's perspective. How has the journey been, and what do you see, and what are the conversations happening at Godrej around DEI? Get us some positive news here.
So I'll take from your previous question when you asked how I felt, right? The morning I felt a little upset. I By the second half, I've entered into a DEI council meeting where all the group companies meet. I'm presenting, this is our gender affirmation policy, and so many people have taken benefit of this. So many going through HRT, going through gender affirming surgeries. It's it's two worlds, right? What's happening in the West is really not affecting me. I'm still going to be talking about gender affirmation policies, going to be talking about different identities that do not comprise to what the West is. And I will second Zainab here. A lot of DEI in India has been picked up from what the West is, but being what we are as an Indian company, why Godrej does this is not just because they copied something what the West is. It's because it is in our own inherent culture, and also in Indian culture, that we have really gone by. People exist. Also, the whole West thing now, even if it affects all these discussions that are happening, you and I, it's in the very urban elite. Let's be honest. In the rural areas, they don't know what Trump is doing or what executive order. There, they have their own issues, and we as a country also have our own issues in terms of identify. I mean, in terms of respect to gender identity, in terms of sexual orientation, and there's a lot of work that we need to do there. If I look at it, I think one was this conversation that I had with, in the DI council meeting where all the council heads are there. Even Nisa Godrej, the chairperson, sits there, and we have these conversations. Simultaneously, in the next few days, I kind of made a post, and I kind of sent it to my CHRO saying, I really want to speak about this two gender thing. And it was like a split second on WhatsApp. She's like, let's proceed with this. And then as an organization, as a representative of an organization, I'm putting it out saying that, we do not agree with the two gender thing. We're open to hiring. Please join us as an organization if you make the cut. And I'll break the fourth wall here, and I'll speak to the audience here, saying that even if the West, even US based companies, if they are pulling back on DEI and you feel that you are unsafe in those spaces, we are always here. You can always apply to us, and I'm a good salesperson, so I'll keep it at that. But on the aid piece of it, and I'd like to touch upon, as an organization, as a country, there's a lot of work, and I think Fabrice has said that we have been heavily dependent on corporates to really look at what they will do for us, and I think corporates and civil society has to come together to kind of really make strides in a lot of stuff. And in the last in few days back, Godrej, along with Keshav Suri Foundation and Radhika Pinamal, we launched something called as the Pride Fund, where we actually collected around 2 crore rupees and started giving it to NGOs, ideally sitting in the rural grassroots areas. There's a website called thepridefund.org. We want it to be a movement and not just some corporates, 2-3 corporates coming together and doing this philanthropy in nature. We want to really source all our funds together in a structured manner and see how things really move the needle, rather than just being dependent on what the West is giving off across in that front. That's how I see at least us as an organization is doing, both in social fronts and from a corporate lens, in the space of DEI. Lastly, I'd like to say, when we see the whole backlash around DEI, the problem is that we use the we use a jargon, and we bring it down to the acronym of DEI. But when people really say, I'm against diversity, I'm against inclusion, I'm against equity, that's when they have to really state that what am I against. If you bring it down and you bring it down to a jargon or to an acronym, it's very easy to say that. But when you say that I'm against inclusion, I don't want to include somebody in my room, it's very difficult to logically give a reasoning for that. And if somebody does tell you that backlash of DI, please ask them to just say the full form and say, Abhi, why? What are you against in this piece of it? I think that's the discussion, and the discourse stops right there. But yeah, I think we'll keep it at
we
that.
discussed, right? Like you have too much inclusion, too much freedom, and don't need
Yeah,
no
too
more.
much equality. I think Fabrice, I was like, yeah, too much equality sounds too much. It's like too much democracy, right? It's
Yeah.
that way. But yeah.
Thank you, Zoya. And great to see that. Yeah, shout out to the Pride Fund that now there is a structured fund to support grassroots organizations in India for Pride initiatives. Thank you. Fabrice, I'll pull
Yeah,
you
and
in.
I would
Yes.
add something. I would add
Yes, please.
something to what Zoya said. Which is that there is a political appointee at the State Department. I can't remember his name, but they dug out a tweet he had made 2 years ago. In which he said, "White competent men need to be in charge." And I thought that was amazing, right? That's really what they think, right? Is that if white men of their group, right? That's what they mean by competent, are in charge, then things are going to be better, right? And that's a bit what Trump said. If white competent men are in the control tower, planes don't fall. Well, if you say things like that, it's much harder to defend than say I'm against DEI, right? Um, I love what Zoya said about Godrej being like, you know what, we will welcome you, come work for us. I really believe that companies that make sure that there is diverse voices in the room have better outcomes. And I think that's not rocket science, right? Is that, we all have that experience in our life that when we are confronted to diversity, our life become richer. And for them to say, look, it's only if white competent men are in the room that you get something that doesn't sound right, right? And so I love what Zoya said, right? Is that unfortunately the DI acronym has allowed people to hide behind that acronym and not say what they really think, which is women don't have much to bring to the table besides cooking, and LGBT people are trash and they shouldn't be in companies, right? They cannot really say that, so they say, oh, DI is reverse discrimination against white people.
So I'll go the other side of how bad things can possibly go. So we never thought at one point of time that we'll have to discuss abortion rights in US. We have that. We did not think gender identity would be banned. We are here. And now they chatter about them trying to go after marriage equality and other rights that are existing for the community. Uh, what do you think about that, Fabrice? Is that possible? Any thoughts around that direction?
Well, look, I mean, when that representative says, I welcome the gentleman from Delaware talking about a trans woman, saying, I do not recognize the denial of biology, that could be also applied to a same-sex marriage. She could say, well, here is the partner of Pete Buttigieg instead of saying husband. And she could say, well, because I don't recognize same-sex marriage as being a biological reality, right? So it's only a tiny little steps, to go from one to another. And I think, to be really honest with you, I think a lot of powerful gay guy in the US are hoping that the buck stops at trans people. You know what I mean? That it's not going to affect us, and that trans people, are going to be thrown under the bus, and we will survive because we have power. It's not super likely. Now, the truth is that LGBT people are going to organize themselves, right? We are probably going to react and try to reach out to powerful gay men in the administration, because there are a few powerful gay men in the administration. We are also going to rely on the Democrats to file lawsuits, and we are going to hope for the best. But I really love this discussion because it's really hopeful to hear, well, India has the largest LGBT population in the world, right? Or maybe China has, but one of the two has the largest LGBT population in the world. And there's only 3% of the LGBT population that live in the United States. So we have to find new motors for our community, meaning countries that can stand up for us. And we also have to find new strategy of organizing ourselves, right? For LGBT people to base their entire future on the political fortune of the Democrats was always kind of crazy, right? As a minority, talk to Jewish people, as a hated minority, you always have to hedge your bets, not put all your eggs in the same basket. I think LGBT people have been a little bit lazy in the past 10 to 15 years in thinking, oh, all the progress is going to come from there, and we are going to invest all our effort in there. So, our community has to come together and think about, how do we organize ourselves? How do we ensure that we, consolidate the little bit of power we have in international organization? How do we find new champions, whether it's, Mexico or India, that can, stand for us in international settings and maybe push for decriminalization, so, I think I'm pretty sure that gay people are going to suffer at some point in the United States. It's not going to stop at trans people. I also think that our community has to organize themselves, Yesterday I went to a lunch and someone was telling me about the trans daughter of a couple that is moving to Canada, right? I mean, that's one of the things our community can do is organize themselves so that people that are in immediate danger can move to places where they can have a life of dignity and opportunity. There's many things we can do. We don't have to be passive on the receiving end of the political fortunes of Democrats in the U.S.
Thank you. So, yeah, quick thing that queer people still exist, where the administrations can come and go, politics can change, political parties can change their opinion, but reality of LGBT plus people doesn't change. And in these difficult times, it's all the more reason to bring about allyship, because people feel more isolated and more targeted now. If you don't believe me, just open any social media page of any queer person and any post and just look through the comments. There's absolute denial of existence and much worse. Check out any Pride March post from tier 2 city in India, and you can see the comments, and that'll give you the reality what queer people face in India as well. How can companies build allyship in today's world? Anyone who wants to answer this?
I think I'm just going to take a quick 1 minute. So in March last year, Workplace Pride International, in partnership with Pride Circle, and Solidarity Foundation, launched something called the Bangalore Declaration. My apologies. And it's a very simple document asking corporates to stand up for what they truly believe in. For people who haven't seen it or access it, I have put the link in the chat box. And you can take a look at it. But what it does, and incidentally, it was also signed by Accenture. So in addition to that, I think we have Ransad, we have Shell, etc., who are still committed to at least as of today, still committed to it. Among the many things that we kind of talked about over there is the need for proactive action, not only in terms of feel good. And one thing that they said is, which really, and I think stands up very strongly, they asked for 100 rupee contribution per employee head of the organization to contribute towards LGBT inclusion at the workplace and beyond in the communities that they look at. It is a really great document. It's simple to read, won't take you more than 3 minutes to finish reading the document. It's not rocket science. It's something that we've been doing for a very long time. But if you want to read it, refer it, um, replicate it, talk about it, because that's exactly what I'm going. I am hopefully joining a couple of other embassy folks and all of their chambers of commerce to actually take this discussion up and say that while the US figures their shit off, we should be able to talk to your own chamber of commerce to push it, especially the European, the Nordic countries should lead, and India and South Asia and Southeast Asia should lead the way for LGBT inclusion in our own terms, within our own cultures, and in the way we deem fit. So for those who want to look at it, please look at this document and
Thank
take
you,
back
Zainab.
points.
Thank you. And also, quick reminder, while in largely with discussion, we did say West, but it's largely North America, which is United States, only that has gone back. You still have Canada, Mexico, a bunch of other countries, all of Europe that is largely progressive and LGBT inclusive. Spain recently came up with a law that any company that has more than in staff of 50 people, like more than 50 headcount, they should have policies around LGBT plus inclusion. So there's great progress also happening. It's just that because Musk owns X, they have the loudest microphones to shout out their hate from, and we hear that a lot more than other good news as well. One quick question for everyone. Now, this question about where should DEI sit? Should DEI still exist as an independent thing? Should it sit under wellness? Should it sit under business strategy in a company? From all your perspectives, where do you feel is the best place for good DEI, impactful DEI work to happen? As an independent DI organization by itself, or within different functions of the company, and which part? Anyone?
I'll take that. DI should exist in every action. Means ideally, I don't see myself being a DEI lead. I really want myself to be redundant. That is my biggest win. The moment that I become redundant, I know that I've done a good job, and that's where I can go doing something else. I get paid because the world is unequal. That is such a dichotomy of things. It's a stupid aspect of stuff. I would want DEI to be every leader to play their part, and that's when things will happen. As a center of excellence, as work that happens in a more structured manner, obviously it can sit under product, it can sit under HR. Currently, major companies ideally put it under the piece of HR because they want to change your workforce representation. That's the ideal reason why it sits there. But it should sit anywhere in the organization, and everybody should play their part. Goals shouldn't be a part to make it a push. That's where I kind of look at it. Currently, it is still driven by some of these sticks and these carrots. And I think once we have reached a stage where it's just a part of things, then I think it will be a little better piece of it. And also, you did mention the whole West and the US piece of it. And I would say that when last year we met at the Out Enable forum, which was organized by Pride Circle in Bangalore. And Zainab had a keynote at that time, and we were like, Asia is going to take the lead for stuff, right? We have a lot of legal things that have happened in the last some years, whether it's Taiwan, whether it's Thailand, even the discussion in India on marriage equality, I would still say it's a big thing, even the effect of it. And I would thank Zainab and all the other petitioners who actually drove it. But I think Asia is really doing that conversation for the world, and it will always happen. Let me put it to you in a way that as a global citizen, things have to happen everywhere. And that's when we'll see a massive change. It's not West versus East. I'm telling you this because in my previous organization, when COVID impacted, as an MNC, we saw that how lockdowns happened in one part of the world. The other part of the world, it was open, and that's when we were able to survive as an organization because money was being flown in. I'm just speaking to you in a much larger sense, and the world in different parts of it will have to come together for equality to really survive. I'll end it at that note.
Thanks, sir. Any last comments, thoughts, Fabrice?
Well, I mean, to respond to your question, I think that's a good time for business leaders to double down on LGBT inclusion, right? And I don't have many private clients, but I had a few in the past, and I always notice that if the top of the company is not 100% on board, it doesn't really go anywhere. And what was kind of fascinating in many ways is that what we see is that the companies that were the first one to roll back everything were the ones where the leadership of the company was not very involved. I am on an advisory board to a French cosmetics company, and the CEO is convinced that this is good business for the companies to be supportive of LGBTQ plus people and to frankly tap into the fact that the relationship to gender has changed among younger clients. And the company is still going 100% on it. I have found myself in many cases where I had great discussion with business leaders, but it wasn't in the C-suite. And what you see is that some of those business leaders were actually resentful about the fact that they had to do DI work, right? And so, ultimately, I'm hoping that more CEOs and people in the C-suite are going to say, "Oh, that's a no-brainer for us," and support their DI efforts.
Thank you, Fabrice. Zainab, last thoughts, comments.
We will overcome. We overcome all the shit in the last few years. We will continue to do that. And I think one point every one of you who is from India on this call needs to remember, in spite of the loss that we had at the Supreme Court when we talked of marriage equality, we managed to get the government to have a high-powered committee to look at rights of LGBTQ people. That discussion is not over. They are still collecting responses, and there is going to be a policy framework. So all of you who are thinking of going to be wriggling out from this, if you wriggle out, I'm making sure that 5 cases are coming against you in various cases in the Supreme Court as well as in the High Court, and we will take people to court for failing to live up to policy recommendations of the government of India. I think that's the only way we're going to be able to truly march forward in the battle of rights and equality.
Thank you, Zainab. Zoya, last thoughts, comments.
I'm just very happy that we're having this conversation. We should keep doing these conversations. And I think for the other organizations which do not have an ecosystem such as mine, because I can thrive at it much better, I'm happy to connect with you all and always give you all support as much as I can. Always open, connect with me on LinkedIn, ready to support and provide whatever our learnings have been so that you can apply it in your organization. How much ever resistance you may face, but if you are the light at the end of the tunnel, then I'm here for you.
Thank you. Absolutely. I think organizations need to really dig deep and figure out why they started this journey of DEI. What was the business case of it that hasn't changed? And they should continue on that, on what makes sense. And with that note, I'll also love to invite companies to come and hire LGBT talent at the Rise Job Fair, because the idea is about connecting with marginalized communities and really test for yourself whether this works for you or not. Make your own business case, make your own assessments, make your own impact. And that's how you craft your journey of being an inclusive company that really lives the business case of it while building a fantastic society around you, nourishing a great diverse community around you, right? So thank you very much, Fabrice, Zainab, Zoya, for taking time out and having this very candid conversation with us, and we shall overcome. And thank you everyone for joining us from all parts of the world, and let's continue to collaborate and work together and deal with this. Thank you very much.
So nice seeing you. Bye,
Thank you.
Zoya. Bye, Zainab. See you soon.
Bye,
Ciao.
Fabrice. Bye,
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.